This project is made possible by support from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Missouri Arts Council, and the Kansas City Art Institute.
Welcome to the Mother Ann podcast, where women who are both artists and mothers discuss their diverse experiences as creators and caregivers. I'm Eleanor Lynn Midyett, project manager and co-curator of the Mother Ann Project and assistant professor of liberal arts at the Kansas City Art Institute. I'm also the mother of 4 sons. Each episode features discussions with artists and other individuals involved in the Mother Ann exhibition, which runs from September 5th to November 21st, 2025 at the Leedy-Voulkos Art Center in Kansas City, Missouri. The exhibit and the podcast disrupt preconceived notions that parenthood diminishes one's artistic practice and celebrate motherhood as a source of expansive creative potential.
But I think, artists overall are always wearing a lot of hats. They're always doing a lot of things. They always have a lot of different either projects they're working on or, roles that they're playing in the community.
In this episode, I speak with artist mother Cory Imig.
My name is Cory Imig, and I am an installation artist, normally large-scale work. And I really like to think about architecture and space and how we move through space and how it affects our perception. So a lot of the installations I make deal with that. And for the past few years, after having kids, I've been really thinking about how to approach making work in that way. And I've continued to make installations, but they oftentimes feel like iterations of maybe ideas I had before having kids. And so it's been a goal of mine to figure out how to have the time and the mental space to figure out kind of what is next. So my work has been shifting and changing a lot in the past few years, but I feel like the core of my work is still thinking about space and thinking about the ways that we perceive it and move through it. But maybe that doesn't result in the same way that it used to.
So your kids are pretty young. Can you introduce us to your children and tell us what stage of parenting you're in?
So my kids are 3 and 5. Henry's 3, Eleanor's 5. Eleanor was born in May of 2020, and I feel like it was a really big moment in terms of an adjustment. Like my work at the time, I think 2019 and 2020 were, I would say, the most active years of my art practice. Like on paper, they could look like the most successful. Like I was making the most money from my work that I had ever made. I was doing a lot of museum installations. And so between COVID and having kids, it was like it really shook things up a little bit. I think it took a lot of time to think about like how to come back to making and how to figure out what that was going to look like. But so Eleanor was born in 2020. Henry was born in 2022, and they're 19 months apart, which is also a really fun but challenging age difference.
Yeah. So you mentioned the shift in your practice from before you had kids doing these large-scale, often site-specific installations, sculptural installations. How do you see how your practice has evolved since having kids and even through COVID, if that's relevant?
Yeah, my practice has evolved a lot and is still evolving. I'm in the middle maybe of that evolution. But currently I'm working a lot smaller, and I think that has to do with the time that I have available. So my normal studio hours now, which happens maybe twice a week, 3 times a week, is like 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. when I'm actually like sitting in the studio. And those are not my best hours. I'm a morning person. And so when I'm often in there, it's thinking about doing something that's maybe not mindless, but something that is relaxing in a way, or it's not really the time I'm coming in and ready to generate a ton of new ideas. And so I've started to work really small scale and things that I can complete during that time. It first started as making models for what potentially could be larger sculptures. And then that evolved into making just smaller, almost like vignettes of spaces that became kind of sculptures in their own right that may or may not ever become large scale.
Initially, you talked about how the large-scale installation work reflected how you thought about space and moving through space. So now that you're working in smaller scale, then how does that relate to your idea of space and maybe even time?
Well, I think right now, the way I'm thinking about space is by creating a smaller space to make work in. It's all relational, right? Like usually being before kids, I was making space or making work in relationship to the space of a room where the walls and the floor and the ceiling were all the box that I was creating work within. About 7 or 8 years ago, I had the chance to make an outdoor installation on a beach. And that was really one of the first moments where I realized how important architecture is for my work, because a beach is infinite and expansive, and anything you make that's on a beach is going to feel super small. And so I had made this very large installation, but it just didn't hold any spatial weight in comparison to everything that was around it. And so I think this is almost the opposite approach, where by creating a very small space and then making work that goes into that space, it can still talk about space without being something that you're physically moving through.
How do you think being a parent to small children has affected or impacted the shift in scale in your work?
Being a parent to small children has definitely caused me to think about, as I was saying before, time differently. So how much time I'm in there. But also, both of my kids love making and love any type of art supply or color that you put in front of them. And of course, they're small. They're working in the workspace that's in front of them, and they make really incredible things. And so I think that has also impacted me. There's times when I'm sitting at the kitchen table, which my son calls his studio, and making with them and just, having fun. And it's allowed me to kind of reconnect in a different way of, the space that's in front of you on a table being the space that you're working in, instead of the mindset that I was approaching before, which was really thinking of everything on a much larger scale. So I think between having time restraints, even just like mental restraints of how much time I can even think about my work in a day, I think it's resulted in just kind of these bite-sized moments.
What advice would you give to artist mothers with small children who are trying to create that balance between their artistic practice and their mothering and maybe a job outside of that?
Yeah, I feel like I'm still figuring that out. So I've taken advice from a lot of others. But what I've seen and really admired from people is this acknowledgement of where you are and what's happening, and to make the most of that situation. So I went to school for fiber, and I was really interested in not necessarily traditional fiber materials or traditional fiber practices, but more the idea that repetition can create structure. And so if you think of like fiber processes like knitting, weaving, sewing, it's the same action over and over again that then creates something bigger. And so that concept or that idea I was really thinking about how that related to time and how that related to our daily lives. And a lot of the work I was making was kind of mapping my daily life, whether that was like the colors that I saw around me, or there was a piece where I recorded everything I said over the course of a day and painted it onto a wall. And so really just living life and then using that as material. And I feel like the mothers that I've seen that have found a good balance have done that in whatever way makes sense for their practice.
I've been asking a lot of the artist mothers that we've been interviewing about this thing called an ethics of mothering, sort of this relationship between parenting, approach to living in the world, and how that informs their art practice. What does that phrase mean to you?
Yeah, I guess when I hear that phrase, it's a little intimidating because I immediately think I don't really know what that means, and maybe I'm not doing it. You know, on Instagram, my Instagram algorithm is made up of like parenting accounts and political accounts and art accounts. And, you know, the parenting accounts are terrifying in a way because it feels like everyone's either like reading books or knows things or has strategies that maybe I don't have. And so when I hear like an ethics of mothering, it feels like something I should have like mapped out ahead of time. But, you know, my approach is to really try to be present with them and to really pay attention to what they're paying attention to, and to remind myself not to just always tell them I don't have enough time or always tell them to hurry up. You know, at times it's like playing Barbies and sitting down and doing that. And then I also try to, as much as I can, bring them into what I'm doing.
I think a lot of other artist mothers will find that reassuring, that it's okay not to have it all figured out all the time. And the best that we can do is to be there for our kids, and flexibility. It seems like that's really part of your parenting and also your art practice, is just kind of leaning into this flexibility. So tell us more about your practice, specifically the role of color. I think that's really one of the most stunning aspects of when I see your work, is your use of color.
I definitely think about color a lot in my work. You know, most of my work is using materials that aren't always necessarily art materials. So, you know, I would say recently with the larger installations that people might be familiar with, I'm using ribbon. And ribbon to create delineations in space, and people could pass through these ribbons and touch them and interact with them. And when thinking about color, you know, I'll think a little bit about like emotional relationships to color, or because I'm using the materials that they come in a preset fixtures of colors, usually different, like a rainbow assortment, right? With ribbons, there's so many colors, and I'm able to really have more choice in that. Yeah, so with the ribbons and the installations, you know, I've created like large fields of, I think the one that was at the Nerman Museum and at Crystal Bridges was a different like shades of blue, these kind of like deep, dark blue colors. I've also done a lot of work with masking tape and with balloons. And so all of these things have kind of this manufactured color. And I think something that I've realized I've done, even when like buying materials for my kids, is I find that I buy them within my color palette. And really early on, I had given Eleanor a sketchbook and some markers, and she was drawing, and I was like, wow, these drawings are amazing. And I realized it's because of the set of materials I had given her that, of course, like, they're my color palette, so I'm going to think they're really cool.
Oh, so you've kind of inspired their artistic practice through the materials that you purchased.
Unknowingly.
Unintentionally.
Yeah, and so it's been fun. And I know when you were in the studio the other day, they were playing, and of course they were taking materials out of my studio, which of course were colors that I would have selected for either whatever they were playing with. I think they were playing a lot with polymer clay. And I had that moment again where Eleanor had made a really interesting, abstract, flat polymer clay thing. And I was like, whoa, this is so cool. And I was like, oh yeah, because of course she is like selecting from the palette of colors that's in front of her.
What really struck me about our studio visit and when Henry and Eleanor were there was just how relaxed you were about them being in the studio. Can you talk maybe more about how you encourage them as makers and how art then is woven into your parenting?
Yeah, so Henry and Eleanor don't come to my studio a lot. Eleanor has been a couple of times, and she has a little table that she uses as hers and knows what her materials are. About a month ago, I invited my family to my studio, including my parents, and they all came up, and I realized that was Henry's first time ever seeing that space, and he's 3. And I was like, oh yeah, like this isn't a space that they're usually welcomed into. And I think that has to do with, we talked a little bit about, is all of these different hats, is it one big like pot of soup, or do you keep them separated? And I think I keep my studio pretty separate. Now that they're a little bit older, I think it could be a space where they have an area that is theirs. And I think one of the reasons when you were there the other day that I felt so relaxed is they had kind of taken over a corner, and they had things over there that they knew they could use, and nothing in there is really precious. So it became just like a really great space for them to make and to color and to cut and to tape and to experiment, which is something we do a lot at our house. They have a cabinet under the kitchen sink that's just full of different art materials that they can constantly take out and bring to the table. So I would say it is something that's happening.
So when you talk about your studio as a sort of this space that's your own, it makes me think of Virginia Woolf's essay, A Room of One's Own. How does that support your creativity and your identity as a maker, having your own space?
It is so nice to have a studio where I can step away and get away and only think about what's happening in that space when I'm in there. And I think having like the difference in how I get into the mode of making has really shifted since having kids, whereas before, I could come into my studio after having a really relaxing day and be able to like get into kind of a mindset where I could make really easily. But what I've realized, coming in after having like a really hectic day, a full day, it's like I can get in there and just be like, wow, sometimes I just want to sit. And I don't put a lot of pressure on myself to like have that be a super active space where a lot has to get done, or there's a lot of rules around it, or, a lot of deadlines, but to really have it be just like when I walk in there, what do I feel like doing? And a lot of times recently, I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks, and it's a really great time to just like disappear into the book and be doing something with my hands. And I think that relates a lot to the work I'm making now, where I don't always have an end goal in what I'm making. A lot of times when I'm in there, I'm making something. And, sometimes I'm like, I don't know what this is. It probably is nothing. But then there'll be times when I come in where it's like, oh, all of these little things are actually this bigger thing. And I didn't know that to begin with. And so just really giving myself the freedom to let that be whatever it is and not have a lot of pressure or constraints or kind of rules around that space, where I feel like in all other parts of my life, there's, we got to get here. We have this thing we need to do. We got to go and do this, whatever. It's like running around in craziness and chaos, but then to have that space just be my space.
So you're a practicing artist, you're a mother, but you also have this other really big role at the Kansas City Art Institute. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that's meant to you?
Yeah. Throughout my practice, I've always tried to make my life consist of a lot of things that rotate around artist, whether that's me making work or working with other artists. I don't have the type of work that's going to sell in a gallery. A lot of the work I make is, large scale installation, and it's not something that someone's going to buy and put in their house. So it's never been a goal of mine to make my income from my work, because I would have to completely change the type of work I'm making. So how I make money has always been, how can I keep myself in a space that's creative, working with others that are interested in art as a way of making money. And so that has led me to being here at KCAI, and I'm currently the director of alumni relations and the professional practice center. So in that role, it's really exciting because I get to work with current students and with alumni and helping them figure out what they want to do and how to create a sustainable practice and how to reach their goals, whatever their goals are.
So recently, you've expanded the professional practice curriculum. Can you talk about that and what excites you about that?
When I started in 2021 to open the Professional Practice Center, one of the things we heard from students was they wanted more professional practice incorporated into the curriculum. They wanted it earlier in the curriculum, and they didn't have a lot of time to invest outside of classes and attending co-curricular activities. And so with all of those things in mind, we realized, we had to make some changes. And so it's really exciting. We have 9 credits incorporated into the curriculum. It used to be 3 credits. And so this is a big expansion in how we're approaching career readiness or professional practice and really just helping students prepare for what they're going to do after school.
Did you have a mentor that was maybe an artist mother when you were going through your art education that you looked up to and maybe reflected what was possible as an artist mother in particular?
I really didn't think about kids until I was around 25. And then my husband, my now husband, he was like, well, yeah, I want kids. And I was like, oh, okay, well, let me think about this. And at that time, I was starting, so when I was 25, I was starting a space called Plug Projects. And there were 4 other artists involved in that, one of them being Amy Kligman. And Amy and I became pretty good friends. And Amy had a kid right after starting Plug. And so I think, as someone who's my closest friend with a kid about 10 years before I had a kid, I think Amy has been an awesome example of what someone can do and how to balance that.
Are there insights as a parent that help you then as an art educator in the Pro Practice program?
Yeah, so I can think of an example from this morning, actually. This morning I was taking a shower, and first my son comes barging into the bathroom, and he's yelling, "Mom, Mom, Mom." And I'm like, open the shower door. I'm like, "What's wrong?" And he's like, "I love you." And I was like, oh, thank you. And then a few seconds later, my daughter comes barging in, and she's like, "Mom, I have a loose tooth. I have a loose tooth." And at the time I was thinking, okay, fine, just leave the room so I can finish showering, and I'll talk to you about it in a minute. But it's one of those moments where as I was in the shower, I was like, oh yeah, this is a big moment for her. This is huge. It's she's going to remember her loose tooth. And so I think taking the time to just think about, what are those life-shattering light bulb moments for someone else, and making sure to kind of to be sensitive to that and have empathy and remember, like, okay, like, yes, this is a big deal. Like, let's talk about it. And I think there's moments like that mirror with students, whether it's like, oh, I wrote an email to this person I didn't know and they're going to meet me for coffee. It's like, cool, I do that every day. But it's like, oh yeah, for you, this is like the first time you've reached out to someone who you've never met before, who you've maybe known about for a long time, and they're going to meet with you. So let's talk about it. Like, what are you going to say? What type of questions are you going to ask? How are you going to follow up with them? And so just remembering that, like, things that happen every day for me or things that I've been doing for a long time can be brand new, and how to just keep that in mind.
So always looking at life sort of through the eyes of your children, but also through the eyes of the students, and recognizing that every experience for them is new. That's lovely. In terms of your roles at KCAI in pro practice and alumni, and then your role as mother, and then also your role as artist, how do you manage it all?
Yeah, I feel like I'm constantly figuring that out, and sometimes I'm better at it than other times. There's usually priorities in one of those areas, so one of them will usually become the thing that you have to focus on. But I think, artists overall are always wearing a lot of hats. They're always doing a lot of things. They always have a lot of different either projects they're working on or roles that they're playing in the community. And I think for me, it is knowing, I try to get to my studio, 3 times a week from this like 8 to 11. And when that's not happening, it's like, okay, I'm realizing I'm not there. So how do I shift that? I think in an ideal scenario, I kind of fantasize about the at-home studio where you could just like escape to it. But I don't know if that would be a good thing or a bad thing, because it is helpful to know there's a place to go. And if I'm not there, then maybe I need to make sure I'm finding time for that.
And what about your role as pro practice and KCAI alumni? How does that fit into that whole mix?
I really love being here and being in this environment. And I think it's like really the only time where I can kind of, I don't want to say like escape motherhood, but it's like I can come here and be so busy and have a ton of meetings and be talking with people. And it's like, oh yeah, that was like a break in a way where it's like I was 100% focused on what I was doing, and I wasn't thinking about, all the other care that needed to happen kind of in the background, but it's like I could just be somewhere and be focused on something. That's really nice.
That's really a breath of fresh air. I think a lot of listeners will appreciate that, just because there's so much pressure to be to think I have to always be thinking of my kids in the forefront, and that I can't ever be thinking about anything else.
I think another shift that we've made over the past year that has really been like a game changer for my practice and motherhood and being a parent is we made this decision to live in an intergenerational household, and that has been huge. And I feel so privileged that, my parents wanted to do that as well and live in this place that's, they're older for parents of people that are my age. My dad is 80 and my mom's 75. And so they're, both still doing things and active, but definitely need some help sometimes. And so it's really nice to be in a place where we're able to help each other and kind of takes some of that burden off of everything that parents have to do.
So you have a really good support system then, living in this multi-generational household with your parents. How have they impacted your parenting, and then how has it impacted your studio practice?
So the first way that I think about how it's impacted my children is the other day, maybe it was a month or so ago, Eleanor needed something and she was upstairs and no one was around and she just started yelling, adult, adult. And it wasn't mom, it wasn't dad, it was just like, I know there's a lot of adults around, so just like an adult come. And I was thinking like, oh, that's so nice.
That's so different and so great. Yeah, in a great way.
Yeah. And so I think, they feel like there's a lot of people around that can help. They like to do specific things. Like Henry loves to sit on my dad's lap and read books, which is like so sweet. And it's about, the extent of what my dad probably has energy for with him. But it's really nice to just all be together and to have them a part of their daily lives.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really sort of supported their sense of well-being that they have so many people that care about them. How about your art practice then? Has that been kind of a break?
It's definitely created more time for me to, one, go to the studio, but to also be able to go to openings and to participate in kind of the art community in a way that I wasn't able to for the prior to that, where it was either like guilt around going somewhere that, it felt like it wasn't an absolute necessary thing. It wasn't like, oh, it's a work event and I'm getting, I have to because of my job, or it was more just like because I wanted to. And so I was cutting a lot of those things out. And I think having that support has created a lot more freedom for me to do things like that.
Great. I want to talk about the sense of community. Earlier, you mentioned Amy Kligman as a role model, as an artist mother in the community. Do you feel like in Kansas City you have developed sort of this community of artists and particularly artist mothers?
I think in Kansas City, I definitely have a community of mothers. Some of them identify as artists and some of them don't. I think one of the most helpful and amazing communities of parents was actually our neighborhood that we had just moved out of, the Pendleton Heights neighborhood. And, within the art community, there's definitely a lot of artists that I'm friends with that are mothers, and it's really nice to be able to look at them and see okay, they figured this out or they're doing this, and how did they do it? How are they able to do these things? And to be able to talk with them. And it's been really nice.
Yeah. Well, it's so great to have you participating in the Mother and exhibition and project, especially because we're trying to highlight community between the community of artist mothers in Kansas City and beyond. What attracted you to the Mother and exhibition and project?
I wanted to participate primarily because it's something I'm trying to figure out, and I admire so many other mothers and people that have developed that balance and that have these active art practices. And I think it's a conversation that I want to be a part of and also something I want to think about more for myself. So I thought, what a great opportunity to spend time talking about it, to be able to meet with you and have studio visits that not only focus on the work, but also on that idea of how motherhood plays into it. So I felt like it was an opportunity for me to kind of put some time to think about it and then also get some language around it.
Well, Cory, you are an example of an artist mother who is balancing it and, a real life example of that. So thank you. And thanks for being part of the conversation. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been really nice to talk with you and to have all of these conversations. So.
This podcast was produced by Cleo Scroll Productions, with Kara Heitz as the director and Emily Milner as the audio engineer. Music is by Brooke Tooley and the Moon Travelers. The Mother and project team includes Eleanor Lim Midyet, project manager and co-curator, Courtney Wasson, co-curator, Laura Berman, senior consultant, Stephanie Leedy-Voulkos Art Center owner and mother of the Crossroads, Erin Woodworth, Leedy-Voulkos Gallery Manager, and Debbie Barrett-Jones, Leedy-Voulkos Gallery Assistant. An extra thank you to the Kansas City Artists Coalition, distribution by Air Company, and Hotel Indigo for their support. Don't forget to listen to the other episodes of the Mother and podcast, and also remember to check out the Mother and exhibition, which runs from September 5th to November 21st, 2025 at the Leedy-Voulkos Art Center in Kansas City, Missouri. More information can be found on their website at www.leedy-voulkos.com. That's www.leedy-voulkos.com. Thanks for listening.